Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the Higsons, because I recently spoke to Simon Charterton, drummer of the band, to find out more about life, love and poetry. And also they have got a special release that's going to be happening in April 2023. This is going to be their complete two-tone recordings being issued for Record Store Day. This is going to be Run Me Down, which features something like 6 songs. So there you go, do check it out. So this is the interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat that gets edited out, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years and the musical awakening. Anyway, Simon's going to tell us everything. He's going to tell us now. Simon, it is over to you.
Well, I remember there being lots of old Beatles singles lying around in the house when I was young. And I remember going to buy, me and my brother going to the record shop. He bought Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever. And I bought I'm a Believer. Right. Which I think had Stepping Stone on the other side of it. Right, the Monkees. Which the old Sex Pistols then did as well. They did, yes. Yeah. And a classic, really. We love that. Was 1967. Those were the first records I bought, and that's probably what you might say is some kind of awakening. 1967. That was the summer of love, actually, wasn't it? Yeah. So it's all you were there at the sort of the moment it all sprung. Well, I was born in 1960, so I do remember England winning the World Cup and the summer of love, but I was obviously very young. Yeah, you were 6. You probably weren't at Hyde Park. Old enough to kick a football around, but not old enough to get out of it in Hyde Park. No, I would have been worried about your parents. Yeah. Talking of which, did you have were your parents kind of creative or musically driven, or did they have any impact on your life? Well, yeah, my dad was in advertising and my mother was a BBC producer she produced Woman's Hour. So I had sort of middle class London kind of creative background, I suppose, yeah. Yes. So when you got to that dear old age of 16, which is quite a moment, isn't it? Because you can leave school then, 1976 in your case. God, I'm doing the maths, aren't I here? So did you stay on to do A levels, or did you sort of just hit the road in a Jack Kerouac sort of way? I did A levels. Then I had 2 years. I had an option of a year or 2 years to do kind of gap years and then go to university. Right. So that just so happened to coincide in 76, 77 with punk. So I was in a punk band called the Homosexuals. Mm-hmm. And then I was I got a friend of mine teamed up with Alex Harvey, who was the sensational Alex Harvey band. So I ended up being the drummer for Alex Harvey. And then after all of that, I ended up going to university, and me and Charlie and a couple of others started the Higsons. Yes, Blimey O'Reilly, that's quite amazing. So when did your kind of getting a musical instrument sort of appear in your life? When did the drums suddenly appear? Oh, I was probably about 12 or something like that. Just couldn't be bothered to practice the piano, any of those things. So the drums, I found I was quite good at them. So laziness really. Yes, but at the same time, having spoke to lots of musicians, drummers and producers, the drummer becomes this very pivotal kind of member of the band, especially in the studio, which can make and break most people, especially the drummer, really. So then, so you got to sort of 18, you had your gap year. Then you mentioned Alex Harvey. How did you manage to be in the Alex Harvey band? Well, a friend of mine who was in the sort of kind of school band that we had, I'm not sure how, but he ended up being in the Alex Harvey band after he'd split up his Sensational band. And then I ended up being drafted in as his drummer. I think what it was that punk had happened and Alex Harvey wanted 2 really young people in his band. Right. So he got me and Matthew sang, and we were both sort of 17, 18. And Alex Harvey was like 42 or something like that. So. Yeah, he looked sinister in my, when I saw him on Top of the Pops doing, the Boston Tea Party and Next. Well, he looked sinister to me, and he looked like a really old, dangerous man. But in fact, he lived in East Finchley, and he was, quite a suburban lifestyle. Yes, but I did an interview with his guitarist actually a few years ago called, is it Zal Clemenson? Yes.
And it sounded like a very damaging time to be in a band with Alex Harvey, really.
Well, I mean, they were sort of very big in the 70s, and they were sort of proper touring, you know, all kind of 70s rock stuff. When
Yes.
I was doing it, as I say, he was living in Finchley, in East Finchley, and it was much more sedate. I wouldn't say sedate, maybe not the right word, but it was certainly less of a kind of big full-on rock thing, you know.
Yes.
It was attempting a comeback, even though he'd only been out of it for about 2 years. But it was sort of, we did an album called The Mafia Stole My Guitar.
Blimey.
And it sort of petered out, really. And then he died about 2 years later anyway, so.
Yes, well, it's what I've noticed with a lot of artists, if they have that kind of zeitgeist moment, it's really difficult to then keep that going, you know. So some people that I've sort of really liked in the 70s, their 80s work has not been good. And if they can then get through that,
they can keep going, though. They often find it comes back good around about 1999 or something like that.
Yes, I know David Bowie's 80s work was not that great. I mean, it was all right, but I did have noticed that a lot of those artists that led the way in the 70s were often floundering like a lost puppy.
Yeah, I think if Alex Harvey hadn't gone and died by sort of 90s, he would probably be quite an iconic thing. So I'm sure he would have emerged as a sort of punk icon, and he knew people like Ian Dury, they were kind of friends. So I mean, I think he would have ended up in some musical theatre, but a good quality musical theatre, you know.
Well, it's interesting because I think that's where he started in the 60s, didn't he? Sort of musical theatre, and
well, he was He was originally Scotland's answer to Tommy Steele.
Yeah.
And then he was in Hair. He was in the original cast of Hair.
Yes, and Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, he was in the original cast of Jesus Christ Superstar. So
yeah,
you never know where it might lead. So there you go. So then, right, okay, that's Alex. I was just really excited about the Alex Harvey thing. Actually, I sort of, I still sort of listen to various kind of certain tracks that I still think they're kind of slightly unsettling. They're quite unsettling, actually, aren't they? They're quite like you wouldn't want to mess with the band, or yes, there's something quite edgy.
I mean, when I played with them, I was sort of 17, 18, and put about 18, 19. But everyone in it was very, very hard drinking.
Yes,
I was too. I mean, I was completely hard drinking, so I'm not going to. I pretty much drank my way from then through the whole of the 80s. So that's huge gaps in my memory.
But you had a very young liver, whereas Alex Harvey, seeing those interviews of him towards the end where he's smoking and drinking, he doesn't look like he doesn't look like he's going to run the 5K park run on a Saturday morning, does he, really?
Well, he would sometimes on stage we'd be sort of playing and he'd suddenly get really angry and tell everyone to get off the stage, and he'd just sort of sit there looking miserable, and then he'd sort of do a slow blues on his own, and eventually he'd ask us all to come back on again. And I think that was a mixture of I think he was on antidepressants as well as alcohol.
Yeah,
I think it's not a good combination. I think he was in a bit of a mess at the time, but like that,
Yeah, and the guitarist I spoke to, I mean, he became a taxi driver quite soon after his moment with Alex Harvey's.
Well, he did once actually pick up. There was a classic amusing story when the version of the band I was in were in the studio, and he did pick up Alex and the new guitarist at the studio. Nobody knew it was going to happen, but it was just an unfortunate sort of coincidence.
Oh, that is painful.
I would have thought so.
It was painful. So then, that's amazing that you managed to go from Alex Harvey to then university life.
Well, I mean, the Alex Harvey thing, after doing a kind of tour and recording an album, there was clearly going to be a big period of like nothing, downtime. And I had a university place, so I thought I'd go to university. And for my first year at university, I did university terms, then in the holidays, little tours with Alex Harvey. So it was like doubling up. And then in the summer of the end of my first year at university, I left. The band was packed it in really. So at that point we started the Higsons at UEA as a sort of it was just a university band,
Yes.
In those days, half the reason to go to university was to meet some people and form a band. That's sort of what you did,
Well, you got a grant, didn't you, and tuition?
You got a grant. It was a totally different attitude, and obviously, if you got your A-levels and you got there, it was pretty good situation, really.
Yes, I remember my brother managed, he saved money. I mean, granted, he became an accountant, but he would be able to get housing benefit. He would be able to sign on during the Christmas holidays, Easter holidays, and summer holidays. And
I think when I was there, they'd stopped you being able to get your rent, but you could sign on, but you often had to kind of give up where you were living and kind of go back to your parents and that sort of thing.
To be honest, most people were so blasé they couldn't even be bothered to do that, could they?
Yeah, well, and of course, in those days, squatting and all that stuff was so easy that there was always somewhere to be, somewhere you could live.
So just because I'm not 100% sure, did you go to the UEA? Was that one of your that moment? And what were you going to study there?
I went and I got my degree in English and American literature, and a minor in film studies as well.
Right. So you managed to, you stayed it for 3 years.
Yeah, all of the Higsons did. No, apart from one, I think all of us did the whole thing. Yeah.
Blimey, because did you meet Arthur Smith? Was he there at the time?
I think he was before us. I mean, I know he's an old UEA person. I think he was there in the mid-70s, possibly. I don't know. I mean, I was there from 79 to 82, so I don't think I coincided.
Yes. So look, 79, major moment in our lives. Margaret Thatcher gets in. The Conservative government are then there for what feels like 1 billion years.
Forever.
And then we have the Falkland crisis. We have the miners' strike. We have, Greenham Common. It feels like we're all going to die in a nuclear war. And then a few years later, I suppose that's kind of red wedge. So it's a bit more. But then, so what was it like for you as a young, activist? I'm assuming you were a young activist, or were you just a bit too drunk?
Well, the band in the 80s, in the early 80s, we did a lot of things for the miners' strike and all that sort of thing. And at university, there were often occupations of the registry, that sort of student occupation sort of thing.
Yes.
And I'd be involved in all of those. Lots of friends of mine joined the Socialist Workers' Party. I never joined any political party, but I taught myself. But we were very much keen to be involved in, anything that seemed. Basically, we all hated Thatcher, and we still do.
Yes. So during your 3 years at the UEA, a fine city. So when did you form the band again? When was it during the degree period?
I think it was. I think we did it in summer of 1980. I think possibly.
Right. It came.
I think our first gig was the summer of 1980.
Yes. And at that stage, was there much of a scene in Norwich musically? Did you feel that?
Not really, but we did create one. I mean, we did. I'm sure Terry's probably told us that somebody put out somebody wanted to put out a kind of Norwich compilation album, and they asked various people, including us, if we wanted to put something on it, and it was called Norwich, a Fine City.
Yes.
Which is the sign, and then there was a amazing coincidence that John Peel on the radio said, "Does anyone know any local bands to him?" And he lived in Suffolk, and somebody sent him that, and he particularly liked the Higsons, so he gave us. Well, we ended up doing about 7 sessions for him, and then after that, other Norwich bands started getting sessions on John Peel, and there was a point in about 82 when it was, or 81, 82, when Norwich was very briefly the sort of trendy indie place for A&R men to go up the A11 to track them down.
Yes, at that stage,
the band, the Farmers Boys, there was Serious Drinking, there's one called Screen 3, the Crabs, Popular Voice, so there were, and there were loads of others, but they all ended up getting records out and having their moment in the NME and sounds and stuff like that.
Yes, and did Norwich at that stage, the art centre was called Premises, I guess, at that point, was it?
It was, I think, yeah.
Yes. So when the band got together, did you have a solid lineup, or was it quite fluid during the?
By the time it became the Higsons, it was a stable lineup. But prior to that, we'd had sort of. I think we had a keyboard. I think Pete Saunders played. He was in Dexys Minimum. I think he played keyboards at one point, but only like for one gig, and we didn't even have a name then. But
yes.
When we had a name, the Higsons, it was the 5 of us. But there's Dave Cummings was the guitarist. He then left university, and replaced him with Stuart McGeechan, who's the one on this record.
Right. So he went on to be a guitarist with Delamitri, didn't he?
He did Delamitri and he did Lloyd Cole.
God, he went on to great indie things. What drove the band's kind of sound and sonic sort of landscape? You know, what was kind of your influences at this stage? What were you trying to go for? Because there was that punk, you know, there was on a very sort of basic level, there was punk. I mean, there was a lot of other things as well. And then there's that post-punk period, isn't there? And then there was kind of New Paisley, there was a goth scene, there was a narco-punk going on. So what was the kind of the driving force for the Higsons?
We obviously all had liked punk, but we were big fans of A Certain Ratio as well.
Right.
And I was a big fan of things like Little Feat and funk stuff from the 70s as well. So as a drummer, I was tending towards having a funky sound, and I particularly as a band we were pretty much contemporaries of like the Pop Group and Pigbag and those kind of people.
Yes.
So we obviously Certain Ratio. We used to travel, you know, all over the place to go and see A Certain Ratio. So we were developing a sound it had that funk drums and bass funky sound that the Ratio had, but we would have a sort of punky guitars, and most of our songs were quite fast. In fact, if you hear them now, they sound stupidly fast, I think.
Yes.
So it was it's very much funk and punk.
Yes. One thing I've noticed, because I've done a lot of interviews, but then the kind of New York no wave scene, you know, which came towards the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, their kind of, I suppose, post-punk period it's much more kind of has a sort of a kind of much more African rhythms or kind of jazz rhythms. It's much more kind of and danceable. You know, I suppose there was a lot more clubs that they were going to, and a much more of a cultural mashup, really, which was quite interesting because there was bands like, was it Liquid, and there was a record label called Z Records, which again,
Z Records, yeah,
which just had the most kind of interesting
Mutant Disco compilation.
That's the one. Yes, I think possibly Brian Eno was part of that kind of. I think he might have produced.
There's Don Was Not Was were in that thing. I think in that world.
Yes. So when
we did gigs with James Chance and the Contortions.
Oh my God, that is so cool.
And James Blood Ulmer, and we did 2 or 3 with Defunct as well. We were really like Defunct were very much our kind of band. You know, they were funky, and they had a bit of brass in there, and that was pretty much what we were trying to do.
Yeah, because it's interesting because you were around that time when, again, you know, on a slightly simplistic level, but the 80s, as it progressed, about 82, 83, the Smiths appeared, don't they? And then there's this kind of 5 years of kind of indie pop, which the Smiths kind of, I suppose they are the band, aren't they, at that point? There's no one...
I can't actually remember the chronology. I mean, was it 83 or was it a bit later? I can't remember.
No, 83 was Hand in Glove.
Was it Hand in Glove? Right.
And that kind of cements a certain scene for quite a period of time. And that's, you know, that's quite something really, isn't it? And suddenly Morrissey, Marr are the kind of the two. I mean, you had that kind of mainstream production sound of Trevor Horn that did, you know, people like Tina Turner and Dire Straits. And, you know, there were bands like, you know, obviously Sade and Duran Duran and such like.
They polished sounds, yeah.
Very polished sound. So as with the Higsons, you were really lucky with the John Peel moment because you had a lot of sessions, didn't you? That must have felt like a kind of being blessed by some sort of higher being.
Well, I mean, in retrospect, you realise how much easier it was to sort of. It was a bit potluck, but the access points still existed. So, for example, if you had a single out, you could send it to Sounds, literally just send it in. And the enemy, and you might get reviewed, and if you got reviewed, you might get slagged off, or you might get well reviewed. And similarly, John Peel always listened to everything he got, apparently, you know. So there were these, and obviously there wasn't the internet, there wasn't this absolute huge amount of music that there is now. So to an extent, there was there was luck, but there were sort of ways in which didn't involve paying out huge amounts of money, you know.
Yes.
And so we know that we had this one moment when John Peel, that was great for us, and then we had our first single came out, and that was like single of the week in Sounds or something like that. So that was like our moment. And if in retrospect we should have probably packed it in then. So, you know, that this is our peak. Thank you very much. But obviously, like most bands, you keep going for a few years, and when things change to being the sort of the kind of indie that you're referring to, which and then it becomes like the C86 type stuff, doesn't it?
We do,
I mean,
yes.
We were definitely by that point sort of going not exactly treading water, but we'd had our time.
Yes.
You know, and I think every band sort of knows this, but only in retrospect, you know that you went on a little bit longer than you should have.
Yes. Well, I think unless you're someone like Bono or U2 or some other band, possibly Simple Minds from that period, there's a sort of we're going to do this and we're going to make a career out of it. I suppose Sting to a degree, but he obviously got fed up with the police and went just.
I think management has a lot to do with that as well. Like very strong management that sees it as a money-making career, lifetime career.
Yes.
And constantly evolving. And I mean, U2, I think, benefited enormously from the Clash splitting up, because the Clash were just sort of breaking America and making punk suddenly sort of transatlantic and not being all sort of bored with the USA. And U2 sort of filled that void when they split up and just became the big, new rock band, really.
Yes, and also
they just as soon as they became a bit pompous, somebody would say, "You've got to stop being pompous," so that they'd start taking the piss out of themselves. They've sort of known how to, bit like Madonna, or just how to kind of keep on changing enough to keep an audience, but sort of maneuver your way through times.
Well, absolutely, and also I think with the Clash, their sort of changing lineup, especially towards the end, was a bit embarrassing.
Oh, it's embarrassing, yeah.
And the last album not so good. Whereas U2, yes, I think there was a phrase I remember that was Stuart Copeland from the Police, who, when they kind of reformed and it was worth millions, so they thought, actually this is worth so much money, we do hate each other, but it would be quite good just to do it for the sort of the sort of pension pot, I suppose. And so they were all enjoying it apart from two people, which was Sting and Stuart, and they had band therapy to sort out some of the issues just to get them through the rest of the tour and get the the payoff, and then just think that's it. So I think with a lot of bands, I'm sure they really rub each other up the wrong way, but with some people, they think it's worth just sticking with it. Let's just keep going, because otherwise we're going to have to get a day job, which is
Well, I don't think anybody in the old days used to think that there was this second life, this sort of, you have your moment, and then if you stick around 10 years later, you can get it back together and do, as you say, the pension pot. But now that's become an established thing.
Yes.
All sorts of bands will keep going, and then some of them become national institutions.
Yes, and go and play at holiday camps for sort of the nostalgia value. But yeah, what I've noticed,
or the roof of Buckingham Palace or whatever.
Oh yes, I mean, that's if you can get up the ladder. But yes, I think most bands from that 80s, especially, which is my decade that I seem to focus on, they have a 5-year narrative. They have the 12-month honeymoon period. They rehearse, they get a sound, they get a single recorded. They play, John Peel goes, that's great. They get a John Peel session. Dale Griffith, from Not the Hoople, does a great production job. And they go on to do the next album. They get their little, mini bus or van. They tour around all the art centres. They think this is going really well. They don't realise they've made no money, but they're happy. Their second, third albums is when they're just getting a bit irritated and thinking, where is the money? There's none. And by the way, what you signed wasn't probably that wise, so never mind, you might as well break up. And also you had the gatekeepers. You had John Peel, you also had Janice Long, Kid Jensen, and 3 weekly music papers, which any Americans will tell you is just amazing, fantastic, because you've got that access to a massive kind of audience at times. So they had a circulation of about 100,000, didn't they? Some of those.
Well, I mean, that's why I think a lot of American acts have come over here to make it and then go back over to America, because it is, as you say, back then anyway, it was a much smaller amount of access points. So if you could get through them, you could actually get known.
Yes.
And the other thing that happens in that sort of 5-year window you're talking about is, I mean, to do all that stuff, you've got to be quite united. So if you're all students together, you probably say, yeah, we're all in it together and we'll do this. But after a few years, some people they might even have families, or they might need to earn a bit more money, or they might not want to be doing all that traveling all the time. So, that camaraderie, and the only thing that stops that from dissipating is if the band is really successful, I think. And then they will start doing it because they think we're making a load of cash. So how could we stop this?
I think also with the 80s, there was so much unemployment with younger people from the left that there was they had job seekers allowance, enterprise allowance schemes. There was all these kind of things that people could do to be sort of claiming a bit of money and housing benefit and housing council tax, and think, well, there's no job, there's no future particularly. So the band gives us a certain identity and sort of confidence.
It keeps exactly, and it gives you a sense of purpose and a unity and a belief that you have a united vision.
Yes,
which is probably similar to a lot of. I mean, I saw a documentary on the flat Earth people the other day, and they may be bad, but they have that same unity. They're like fans of some obscure cult band, but it keeps them all going.
Keeps them very happy. I did an interview with a member from a band. He told me I can't then use the interview because he realised he sounded a bit bonkers, but flat Earth, fake moon, everything was a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, no, that's all I said. That's all in this documentary, and I just couldn't. I had never heard of that dome over the Earth thing, but
no,
they absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and of course they can't not believe it, because if they stepped outside of that pattern, they'd lose all their friends, all their relationships, and that everything would collapse. So they have to keep it going. It's a sort of strange. And I think some people treat bands like that, Certainly, a lot of fans treat bands like that. They come to, they come to things all the time. They want to know everything because that band is their sort of world,
Yes, absolutely. No, it's a fascinating world. But when I was trying to sort of keep the interview going, thinking, oh my goodness me, that's amazing. I mean, I know the 9/11, blah blah, but the fake moon, flat Earth, and everything else was just like, wow, it's I felt exhausted at the end of it. I was absolutely shocked. I didn't know what to Google next, put it that way. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to think about it all. Anyway, look, so your first release as the Higsons was a live album at the Jacquard, 1982. So this time you'd just about finished university, hadn't you? This was the sort of
that was. I mean, we'd had a couple of singles out before that. The singles, "I Don't Want to Live with Monkeys" and "It Goes Whap" were the singles. And I think that Live at the Jacquard thing came out just as we were finishing university. Yeah.
Yes, but then you have the big album, don't you? The Curse of the Higsons.
Yeah, that wasn't until about 84, because that took a long time. It was bits and pieces coming from all over the place to piece it together, and eventually that came out. And it came out probably at the point when we really were getting close to thinking we've had our time. I would suggest.
Yes, I guess it was, because you were sort of only a few more years before it. When you were so that wasn't just the one project that you went into the studio for 2 weeks, having written the material, and went, right, that's it, we're going to do it.
Well, I mean, in our career, we had so many little labels we were on, and I think that album had some stuff that was on the two-tone thing, and some stuff that had been on previously recorded, and I mean, I can't remember the entire chronology, but certainly it was bits and pieces. I mean, there was a concentrated period when we were recording it in Wave Studios, but it was sort of, it wasn't like a kind of a thing that we all said, right, this is our album, let's go and write a bunch of stuff. Lots of it was stuff we've been doing live for years, and it was a bit of. I think it wasn't like we said this is our master work. It was more of a sort of a potpourri of bits and pieces, I think.
Yes, a sort of a mashup, a sort of archival project to sort of,
Yeah, I don't think the Higsons ever had an album that we could say that's the great album. That's the one which I think we had a couple of good singles, and I think the other thing is we were very good live. Live was our thing. So if the Live at the Jacquard thing had been recorded on better equipment, because I think in those days it was probably a cassette machine or something.
Yes, by a guy called Def Jeff, I think, probably.
I have no idea, but certainly, as I say, I don't have a totally clear memory of any of this, but I've always felt it was singles were the strength and live gigs were the strength of the Higsons, and I don't think the album. I mean, but the material on Two Tone was that was us being much more polished and trying to go for a sound that was slightly more I mean, I think "Run Me Down" actually had an outside chance of having been a hit single, but
Yes.
it wasn't one, but it had a polished sound, you know.
Did you with all those record labels? And that's the one thing that I've sort of come across and still find quite interesting to try and work out is the world of ownership, publishing, who gets what. Did you, because obviously when you've been on different record labels, often there's a legality which kind of everybody thinks, oh, it'd be great to release this stuff from 40 years ago, but we don't own it and we don't know who does, and it's in a cupboard somewhere. So did you manage to sort of keep hold of the material that you recorded?
Well, Terry Edwards has always had this thing of his own career, and he's had a label, Sartorial Records, that he's put his stuff out on. And over the years, he has got the rights back. So I think all the stuff now is back in our ownership. But you do find that ultimately, I mean, a lot of these tiny labels end up being owned by Cherry Red. I don't know how it ends, but you get these Cherry Red compilations where tons and tons of obscure indie stuff is suddenly
Swallowed.
Yeah, well, I've no idea how any of this works. You suddenly think, oh yes, they're the people who now own. We have a DVD of the Higsons live at Camden Palace. It's out on Cherry Red Video or something like that. No idea how they own it, but they swallowed up various catalogs. I think it is over the years.
Yeah, I think somebody who has that indie record label as an example, and they think, I'm not sure what to do with it. I'll just see if Cherry Red I'll give them a phone call and see if they would like to give me some money for it, and I'll just give it to them. And the band they don't enter into that negotiation, because
No,
I
they
think
don't.
because when they recorded it, they probably signed something to say, oh yeah, give us this money, but it's a bit like going to a supermarket. It's like you buy something and you get something, hopefully, and then that's theirs, and they go, oh, I own this. The band don't own it because I
And
paid for it.
the bands would have only ever seen tiny little trickles of money anyway, so they probably had stopped thinking about it. So it's worth, if you own the label with all of that, lots of indie bands back catalogue, that's worth something. But each of those individual bands, what they are owed is very small. So
Yes.
so it's worth it for Cherry Red to have a huge number of them.
Yes, and then I mean, recently they put out, a compilation on, the Manchester scene, Liverpool, Sheffield.
Yeah.
They've done C86. They've gone up to C91. They're going down to C85. They've done goth ones. They're doing electronic ones. Anything they can kind of creatively think about from that period, they're just putting these ones out. And because it's over 40 years now, people are going, oh, that'd be great. I'd love to get a triple CD box set of that material that I slightly forgot about, and reminisce and play and enjoy. And then, kids all around the world are discovering these bands for themselves. As we know, as once being young and discovering bands is one of the great joys of life, isn't it?
Well, I think if you're discovering them now and you're young, you'll probably get them via, obviously the internet and stuff, and you're not really so aware of the chronology, when these different things were. They're just all music you're hearing and you like it,
Yes.
You might not be thinking, oh, that song by Franz Ferdinand is very similar to that song by the Gang of Four. It's just they're both songs that have a quirky angular guitar, and if you like it, you like it.
But you also remember from that period, we were very tribal, weren't we? So we didn't sort of like the beat and status quo, because you would have been beaten up, wouldn't you, for sort of liking one or the other. I remember I grew up in a kind of slightly heavy metal kind of community, I suppose. So if anybody was mod, they would have been chased down the street and kicked. So
well, when I grew up, it was more like you either had an album under your arm, or if you liked singles, you were, I mean, back in the early 70s, singles were like teeny boppers, and albums for people like prog rock. Yes. And then when punk came along, that turned it around, and singles were suddenly everything.
Yes. Well, I had a brother who was 7 years older, and he was prog rock, and he did not have any singles. All his albums were in those plastic covers.
Yeah.
And I became
Roger Dean sleeves and perfect copies.
Yes, absolutely, untouched. And I was forbidden to play them, so I obviously sneaked into his room and listened to the world of Yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, Barclay James Harvest, and the solo work of Rick Wakeman. So check me out with my prog knowledge.
Well, the Germans were doing their krautrock at that time, and it was a lot better.
Yes, well, he did have a Tangerine Dream record and Patrick Moraz, but
But Can and Amondul too, and all those, or Nori and all those people, their music sounds fresh as possible now. I mean, it's hugely influential. It's hugely, now it sounds great. Whereas, frankly, you won't want to listen to Gentle Giant too much. I wouldn't have thought.
No, you wouldn't. But bizarrely, one of the members became a producer, and I know a lot of indie bands often mention that he was a really lovely guy who got a great sound. I can't remember his name, but yes, good old Gentle Giant. I don't know. Camel, we loved them, didn't we? But then, yes, so look, coming up to the present day, 2023, you've got this anniversary single out, the Run Me Down single that came out in 1983, which was an interesting period. This was when Thatcherism was in its full steroid glory, wasn't it? She'd won the war and everything was going great guns. So what was the mood like with the band entering the studio to record it? Can you remember the rehearsals and it coming together?
I can't remember very much at all. I can remember that we got Jerry Dammers to produce it because on a drunken night, I bumped my friend Pete Saunders, played in Dexys Midnight Runners. Dexys had been touring with the Specials. He introduced me. We had a bit of a laugh, and I said, "Would you like to produce us?" And he said yes. So we went into the studio in Leamington Spa, I think, or something like that. And I just know we did it, and Jerry did a very laid back job of producing it. And it sounded, we changed the way it was going to be it's called Tear the Whole Thing Down, isn't it? But it was originally called Burn the Shithouse Down or something like that. And we decided to change the words.
Yes.
In an attempt at getting on the radio, probably.
I know Steve Wright in the Afternoon would not like to use those kind of language. But
and
so
then Run Me Down coincidentally has the word down in it again, which is, there we go. It's obviously a thing.
But it has a very funky sound, and listening to it now, it sort of stands up, doesn't it, to 4 decades.
Well, Run Me Down, I would say, was if Orange Juice hadn't had Rear Beard Up and Start Again, which is about the same sort of thing. I think that was what we were aiming for. That sort of sound, funky but mainstream.
Yes.
Pop. And there obviously wasn't room for both of them to be hits at the same time, but that's the sort of sound we were going for.
Yes, and that's so. Whose idea was it to focus on this release from '83 as the anniversary?
I'm afraid I haven't. I think it's Terry, but I don't know. I'm not sure where the original idea has come from for that.
Yeah, but it's been. What label is going to be putting it out?
I think it's on Terry's Sartorial. Yeah, Sartorial Records.
Right. So Terry is the man who's archiving his.
He has been archiving the Higsons, and I think he is the kind of guy who would be aware that these songs hadn't all been out on vinyl together. Right. And he would have decided, and I think he spoke to Jerry Dammers to see if Two Tone wanted to do it on. So whoever it is who actually now owns the Two Tone catalogue has done a deal with us to let us do this.
Yes, absolutely.
But I haven't been following that much detail, so I don't really know much more than I have a copy.
But you've got all the, like 12-inch versions, which we loved in those days, instrumental, and also Lang Lang, which is a classic. It does have that sort of pop funk vibe to it, which I would imagine the kids are going to love it.
I have no idea whether the kids love it or not, but certainly it's it's for Record Store Day. That's the thing. Yeah. So Record Store Day, that people do these kind of one-off anniversary type releases for that.
Yes.
But obviously, the Higsons aren't planning on getting back together at any point, so I don't think there's going to be any gigs to back this up with or anything like that.
No. But then, so what happens? Did you have a kind of a moment like, I don't know, The Doors, The End? Did you all sit together in a pub and say, that's it, we're going to the band's over? Or did it just sort of fizzle out in a rather, no one just bothered phoning each other?
It wasn't really a no one bothered phoning each other. I think we sort of knew, and then we just decided, okay, let's do a couple more gigs to I think we had to pay a VAT bill at one point. So we did at least a gig in order to pay that off.
Yes.
But that was all very done in very friendly, or whatever the word is.
Yeah.
We just knew. I mean, a couple of people like had started getting into painting and decorating, and I don't remember. So about 86, lots of people in London, particularly, were doing up there. You know, there was a big property thing going on of doing up properties and selling them and stuff, and people were able to make more money as painters and decorators than we ever made.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah,
So
bosh, loads of money.
Yeah, and that was what Charlie and because Paul Whitehouse and Charlie had both been at university as well, Charlie Higson. So with us, so that whole loads of money thing actually pretty much came from the painting and decorating that Charlie and Paul were doing towards the end of the Higsons' career, really.
Oh, okay, God, that's a good guess, actually. So then, what happens to you? Where's your next musical or creative moment, or is it sort of?
I currently, well, I mean, I've been doing music with various people ever since, including that. Well, I did stuff with that guy Pete Saunders I mentioned when he was in Dexys, and I currently, for the last 13 years, Terry and I have had another band called the Near Jazz Experience, which we've with Mark Bedford from Madness, and we've been putting out stuff and playing since 2010, I think it is. Yeah.
Yes.
I got another one called Simon and the Pope, which is a sort of funk. It's a duo, which is sort of somewhere between Ian Dury and some kind of funky krautrock thing. And
nice.
Gideon Coe plays us quite occasionally and stuff like that. So, and living down in St Leonard's, I don't know if you know Hastings St Leonard's, but it's a massive music scene down here. It's like, and there's lots and lots of ex-members of bands, and you know, people from things through from Alabama 3 to the Ruts to also across the board, people playing music with each other in lots of venues. It's kind of place where pubs regularly have music, and
yeah. I
so
think have you come across a band called the Lucy Show? I think there was a member of the Lucy Show who went to Hastings. I did an interview with, and I went.
The Lucy Show. I remember them they were banned around quite a while ago, weren't they?
Yeah, they were in the 80s, but one of the members I think now lives down in Hastings. I just wondered if you.
Almost certainly. Well, I mean, as I said, there's so many that wouldn't surprise me at all.
No. So did you have to sort of get a day job to, like keep yourself going, and the music was kind of a kind of.
I've done all the things that people would do. I've done driving, and I've done painting and decorating, all that stuff. Since I've lived down here, there's a venue called the Kino Teatra, which is a big arts, music and cinema and arts venue, and I'm the music manager, so I get to put on events there, but also I actually get to play there myself as well, and the NJ and various other people play there.
Fantastic.
That's been going down here for about 9 years.
Yes, God, that's all good stuff. And if you could have whispered something to your 16-year-old self starting out in this kind of interesting world of music and creativity, is there anything that you would have just wanted to tell them, even if they just ignored you anyway?
Probably, if now that I'm 63, I would probably say that I'm actually quite pleased to have continued doing what I did, because I actually enjoy playing music more now than ever. Yes. And I do tend to, and the stuff I do is the stuff that I want to do. I'm not sort of generally doing other people's thing. And if you can maintain that sort of independence, if you can get to do that, that's great. But you won't make any money out of it. So if you want to make money, do something completely different.
Yes, I remember doing an interview with, is it John Drumbo French, who was in Captain Beefheart's Magic Band, and he had quite a disturbed time because he did Trackmaster Replica, which I think they were almost kidnapped, and
they were sort of manipulated and kidnapped and stuff.
Yeah, and he said he just wished he'd been in Crosby, Stills and Nash and made some money, but instead he got sort of emotionally abused and broke. So,
but you get the kudos of having been on Trackmaster Replica.
It's true.
You don't get a sting-sized paycheck. I mean, there's another guy who's moved down here who's a friend of mine called Anthony Moore, and Anthony Moore did things like in the 70s. He did Henry Cow, Slap Happy. He produced This Heat. He's done a whole raft of things which are incredibly alternative.
Yes,
he only can exist because he also wrote lyrics for Pink Floyd in the 1980s, and so that's his pension. Pink Floyd pension.
That's a good pension. That's a good pension, isn't it? Yeah, this heat.
And that's what we'd all like to have. We'd like to have a Pink Floyd pension. But I mean, one thing that happened to the Higsons was that when about 5-6 years ago, we got one of our tracks used on BBC Two and BBC Four as an ident for like 4 months. So you get quite a big, you get that was worth a few thousand. But I mean, it's not mega, but that's sort of what keeps you going. That sort of those little things like that.
Yeah, you can't really have a studio record, flat build, but you could probably get the doors replaced, can't you?
You get the doors replaced, and the reason so many musicians live down in St. Anne's and Hastings is that it's cheap.
Yes,
but lockdown has changed that because so many other people realised that, and they moved down here with their laptops, and it's now rapidly going up.
Yes, but you probably get better broadband, don't you?
I would imagine so.
With all these people needing better connections. Anyway, look.
That's true. Yeah.
Yes, indeed, yes. That, dear listener, was me in conversation with Simon Charterton from the Higsons, drummer, vocalist, and now in his new combo, the Near Jazz Experience. But the most important thing about the Higsons, and there's lots, but it's going to be the issue or the release of Run Me Down, the complete two-tone recordings that's coming out on Sartorial Records. This is going to be, 2023. Do check it out. There's something like 6 tracks, including Tear the Whole Thing Down, and various other instrumentals and extended 12-inch versions. So it's going to be fantastic. This, though, has been the C86 Show. I'm David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. Also, all these interviews have been archived. Aren't you lucky? So you can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.